Hey guys, tonight we begin with something very calm, very quiet, and historically accurate in the most underwhelming way possible. So dim the lights, put your phone down somewhere it can't judge you, get comfortable. Because tonight, we're not talking about bodies in the streets, not bells ringing every 5 minutes, not cartloads of dramatic doom. We're talking about the other times, the long stretches, the weeks, sometimes months, when everyone knew a plague was around, but no one was dying today. And somehow that was worse. So let's ease into it. Imagine a medieval town. Stone buildings, wooden doors, a smell that never fully leaves. You know the one. You wake up in the morning, you're alive. Good start. No one on your street died overnight. Also good. But the plague is still in the area, which is medieval speak for don't get too attached to your plans. Life does not stop. It just becomes cautious and slightly annoying. People still have jobs. They still need bread. They still argue with their neighbors over fences that were clearly moved 2 inches to the left. But now every cough is suspicious. Every headache is suspicious. Every stranger is extremely suspicious. And nobody wants to be the first one to panic, because panic is how you get accused of something, or locked out of town, or both. So ordinary people did what humans always do. They waited and filled the time. Let's start with mornings. Most people didn't wake up thinking, ah yes, another day in the shadow of pestilence. They woke up thinking about chores, about food, about whether the market was open. Markets were inconsistent during plague times. Sometimes they shut down entirely, sometimes they operated quietly, which just meant fewer stalls and more side-eye. Vendors would show up anyway, because grain does not care about public health, and neither does rent. So people went to market. They just stood farther apart than usual. Not 6 feet, no one measured, but enough to feel morally responsible if something went wrong later. Buying food became an exercise in internal debate. This bread looks fine, but the baker coughed once. Was that a plague cough or just a baker cough? No one knew. And no one wanted to ask. Asking questions was risky. If you suggested someone might be sick, you were basically suggesting their entire household might need to vanish for a while. So instead, people nodded politely, paid quickly, and washed their hands in whatever counted as hand washing at the time, which was usually water, sometimes with herbs, sometimes with wine, sometimes just aggressively. Once home, people cleaned. Not disinfected, cleaned. Sweeping, scrubbing, opening windows even in winter because bad air was a thing everyone agreed on. Miasma theory was popular, the idea that disease floated in on smells. So if your house smelled bad, that was basically an invitation. People burned herbs, rosemary, sage, juniper. Did it help? No. Did it make them feel productive? Absolutely. Feeling useful during a plague was important, especially because most of the time there was nothing else to do. Work slowed down. If you were a craftsperson, fewer customers came by. If you worked for someone wealthy, they might leave town temporarily, which could mean weeks, or years, or never coming back. So ordinary people filled time with maintenance, fixing things that didn't strictly need fixing, repatching roofs, recounting supplies. Inventories became very popular. People counted grain, counted candles, counted family members. Still here, still here, still here. Good. Children noticed the tension first. They were told not to play with other children, or to stay close, or not to touch things, which, as you can imagine, worked perfectly. Kids still played. They just did it quietly and closer to home. Games changed. Less chasing, more sitting, more watching. Parents hovered more than usual, which says a lot considering medieval parenting standards. Children also overheard conversations, whispers, rumors. Someone's cousin in another town got sick. Someone else's uncle disappeared behind a locked door. Kids didn't fully understand, but they learned a new tone, the plague tone. Adults spoke softer, more carefully, like words themselves might attract attention. Religion filled a lot of the empty space. Not dramatic public processions yet, those came later. This was quieter. Extra prayers at home, candles lit at odd hours, small personal bargains with God. "I'll be better" was a common one. People confessed more often, just in case, because dying with unresolved sins felt unnecessary. Churches stayed open as long as they could, but attendance fluctuated. Some people went constantly, others avoided them completely. Crowds were comforting, crowds were dangerous. Pick one. So people prayed at home, or stood just inside doorways, or listened from outside. Clergy were busy, but not always helpful. Advice ranged from reasonable to deeply unhelpful. Keep clean. Sure. Avoid sinful thoughts. Okay. Don't let strangers into your home. That one stuck. Xenophobia spiked quietly. Travelers were watched. Merchants were questioned. Anyone new was automatically suspicious. Where did you come from? Who did you talk to? Why are you here now? Towns sometimes closed their gates, sometimes reopened them the next day. Indecision was common, because closing gates meant no trade, no news, no supplies, and opening gates meant everything else. So most towns compromised. They limited entry, or required waiting periods, or just hoped for the best. Inside homes, social life became smaller, fewer visitors, shorter visits. Conversations got repetitive. Have you heard anything new? No. You? No. Good. Meals were quieter. People ate together, but with a little more space. Sharing utensils became less popular, which frankly should have happened sooner. Sleep was strange. Some people slept more, exhausted by constant low-level fear. Others slept less, listening for sounds, coughs, footsteps outside. Nighttime was when imagination got loud. A noise outside could mean a neighbor, or officials, or nothing at all. People learned to lie still and wait. If someone did get sick nearby, the whole neighborhood shifted. Not panic, adjustment. Paths changed, people crossed streets, doors stayed closed. Food was left quietly near doorways, no knocking, no conversation. Care happened at a distance, which sounds cold but was in its own way considerate, because getting too close helped no one. Gossip filled the gaps. Not wild rumors yet, just speculation. Do you think it's really plague or just a fever? They say it's worse in the south, or the north, or the next town over. Everyone knew someone who knew someone. No one knew anything for sure. And that uncertainty was the hardest part, because humans can handle bad news. We struggle with waiting. So ordinary people waited. They kept routines, they maintained appearances, they pretended this was temporary, because imagining permanence was too heavy. And slowly, subtly, life adapted. People laughed a little less loudly, they planned less far ahead, but they still lived. They still complained, still hoped, and every morning, waking up alive felt like a small private victory. No announcement, no celebration, just quiet relief. And tomorrow, they'd do it all again, because when no one was dying, the plague was still there, just watching, and so were they. Still here.
Hey guys, welcome back, or welcome further in. If you're just drifting along, that's perfect, because part 2 is about drifting, about time stretching, about nothing happening very slowly. By now, the plague had settled into the background like a bad smell everyone agreed not to mention directly. Not gone, not loud, just present. Ordinary people became experts at waiting. Not heroic waiting, not patient waiting, just the kind where you wake up, sigh softly, and think, all right, still here. Days began to blur. Markets opened some mornings and didn't on others. No announcement, no bell. You just showed up and checked. If stalls were there, you bought what you could afford. If they weren't, you went home and pretended that was fine. People learned alternative routes through town, paths that avoided certain houses, certain streets, certain rumors. A closed shutter meant many things: travel, illness, debt, or someone just wanting to be left alone. No one knocked to find out. Knocking felt aggressive now.
Work adapted, or shrank. Tailors mended more than they made. Shoemakers repaired old soles instead of crafting new ones. Blacksmiths waited longer between customers, staring into fires they didn't really need. Idle hands weren't the devil's playground. They were just hands. People used them to fidget, to fold cloth, to pick at wood, to count things again. Waiting gave people time to notice themselves. A headache lingered longer than usual. A cough echoed in the chest. Was that normal? Had it always been there? Self-awareness skyrocketed. Every sensation became suspicious. People took inventory of their bodies the way they took inventory of food. Still working, still functional. Good enough. Social life didn't vanish. It shrank inward. Instead of gatherings, there were pairs, one-on-one conversations. Short, careful. Neighbors leaned out of windows instead of stepping inside. Voices stayed low. Faces stayed serious. Jokes still happened. They just landed softer. Humor shifted. Less, isn't life ridiculous, and more, if we don't laugh at this, we might scream. Children sensed this shift and adapted faster than adults. They invented quieter games with rules about distance, throwing things instead of tagging, watching instead of chasing. Parents pretended not to notice the sadness creeping into these adjustments, because noticing meant acknowledging, and acknowledging led to thinking too hard. Education, such as it was, became inconsistent. If a town had a school, attendance dropped. Teachers got sick, or left, or simply stopped showing up. So children learned at home, or not at all. Reading slowed, writing slowed. Practical skills rose in importance. How to fix, how to mend, how to stretch supplies, how to wait. Meals became simpler, less variety, more repetition. The same stew, the same bread. People ate slower, not out of mindfulness, out of habit. Eating became one of the few moments that still felt normal. Religion shifted again here, not into spectacle yet, just into routine. People prayed less desperately and more mechanically. Morning prayers, evening prayers. They weren't asking for miracles anymore, just continuity. Let tomorrow look like today, please. Clergy noticed this change. Confessions grew quieter, less dramatic sins, more vague anxiety. I feel wrong, I feel tired, I feel afraid for no specific reason, which honestly was extremely specific. Church leaders offered comfort the same way everyone else did, with words that didn't promise much. God sees, God knows. That was enough, or had to be. News traveled slowly and unreliably. Someone heard the plague was worse elsewhere. Someone else heard it was improving. Both statements could be true, or neither. Messengers were watched carefully, letters handled cautiously. Paper felt dangerous in a symbolic way. It had traveled, it had been touched. People still read them. Curiosity always wins eventually. Town officials tried to look competent. They issued guidelines, then revised them, then quietly ignored them. Wash more, gather less, report illness. But reporting illness was complicated, because reporting illness meant consequences. Locked doors, red markings, isolation. So people waited until they couldn't hide symptoms anymore, which was usually too late. But when no one was dying, this system felt theoretical, like rules meant for someone else. Life continued in this awkward middle ground. Marriages were postponed, then unpostponed, then quietly conducted with fewer witnesses. Funerals were smaller, or delayed. Grief, like everything else, was subdued. People cried privately, briefly. Too much emotion felt dangerous, like it might weaken you. Strength was quiet now. Strength was not drawing attention. Fashion shifted subtly. Less extravagance, more practicality. Clothes were worn longer, mended repeatedly. Looking healthy became important. Pale was bad. Thin was suspicious. People ate a little more when they could. Rested when possible. Self-care, medieval edition. At night, towns were darker. People went inside earlier. Candles were expensive. Also, darkness felt safer. Fewer encounters, fewer questions. Homes became smaller worlds. Families talked more, or less. Both happened.
Some conversations deepened, others dried up entirely. Silence wasn't always tense, sometimes it was just empty, and empty felt manageable. Occasionally, something broke the rhythm. A bell, a shout, a cart. People paused, listened, then, if nothing followed, they exhaled and returned to what they were doing, because reacting constantly was exhausting. Ordinary people learned to pace their fear. They couldn't afford to be afraid all the time. So fear came in waves, short ones, then receded. This was not bravery. This was survival. And slowly, without anyone noticing the exact moment, waiting became normal. Not temporary, not exceptional, just another skill, like baking, or sewing, or pretending not to notice certain things. And tomorrow would come, and if no one died, people would wake up, check the street, and think, all right, still here. And that would be enough for now.
Hey guys, welcome back again, or welcome deeper into the quiet part of history. By part 3, something subtle had shifted. Not the plague itself, that was still doing whatever it felt like doing. What changed was the way people talked about it. Because when facts run out, rumors step in and immediately start freelancing. And ordinary people, stuck in long stretches where nothing visibly happened, had a lot of time to listen and repeat and adjust their behavior just slightly based on vibes. At this point, most towns had accepted that official information was unreliable. Not malicious, just late and vague. So people filled the gaps themselves. Someone's aunt swore the sickness traveled through cloth. Another neighbor insisted it clung to coins. A man down the street claimed cats were the problem, which historically went very badly for cats. Others argued the opposite, that cats protected homes. Both sides sounded confident. Confidence was persuasive. People picked whichever version fit their existing feelings about cats. This was how public health worked now. Personal preference plus anxiety. Daily routines absorbed these rumors quietly. Coins were dropped into bowls of water. Clothes were aired out longer than usual. Animals were kept closer or farther. No one announced these changes. They just happened. And once something became routine, it stopped feeling strange. People also watched each other more closely. Not aggressively, not yet, but observantly. Who was coughing? Who looked tired? Who hadn't been seen lately? Absence became noticeable, and noticeable absences invited explanation. She's staying inside. He's visiting family. They're being careful. All phrases that meant the same thing. We don't know, and we don't want to ask. Because asking might make it real. Shops adjusted again. Some displayed charms, religious symbols, herbs tied to door frames. Not because they worked, but because customers liked seeing them. It reassured people, and reassurance was good for business. Markets developed unspoken rules. Stand here, not there. Touch this, not that. Move along politely. Eye contact increased, so did nodding. People communicated caution without words, which is impressive considering medieval people loved words. Homes changed too. Furniture shifted. Beds moved closer to windows or farther from doors. People slept with personal items nearby, not for comfort, for grounding. If the world felt unstable, your own space needed to feel controlled. Nighttime remained the hardest. Darkness amplified everything. Sounds traveled differently. Thoughts grew louder. People lay awake replaying conversations. Did he sound tired? Was that cough forced? Did I stand too close? Regret became a hobby. Morning brought relief. Light made things feel manageable again. Even bad news felt less heavy during daylight. So mornings were busy. People rushed to do things early, before fatigue, before doubt crept back in. This created an odd rhythm. Fast mornings, slow afternoons, long nights. Children adapted in strange ways. They asked fewer questions, not because they understood, but because they sensed adults didn't want to answer. So curiosity turned inward. Kids listened more than they spoke, observed routines, learned when to be quiet.
Some became helpful, others withdrawn. Parents noticed and felt guilty and tired. But parenting didn't stop. It just became quieter. Stories were told more often. Not heroic stories, familiar ones. Repetition was comforting. The same tale, the same ending. Predictability mattered. Meals were still shared. Spared scarcity hadn't fully hit yet, so eating together remained a small anchor. Conversation during meals changed. Less planning, more reflection. Do you remember when, before all this, nostalgia bloomed quickly? People missed normal inconveniences. Crowded streets, annoying neighbors, too much noise. Funny how that works. Religious life shifted again. Some people grew more devout, others more distant. Faith fractured quietly, not into conflict, into variety. Everyone had their own version now. Personal rituals emerged, private prayers, small gestures, touching a doorway before leaving, avoiding certain days, repeating phrases under breath. Superstition wasn't dramatic, it was practical. If it made you feel calmer, you kept doing it. Town officials struggled with authority, not because people rebelled, but because people stopped listening fully. Rules were interpreted loosely. Guidelines became suggestions. People followed what aligned with their instincts, which was shaped by fear and habit and rumor. Travel slowed, not stopped, just slowed. People weighed risks carefully. Is this trip necessary? Is it worth the worry? Often, the answer was no. So communities became more insular. News grew local. What mattered was what happened here. Faraway outbreaks felt abstract. Here was personal. Someone you recognized, a street you walked daily. The plague became smaller in scale, but larger in presence. It hovered, always implied. Craftspeople found new kinds of work, making charms, carving symbols, copying prayers. Practical magic thrived, not because people abandoned reason, but because reason had limits. And limits are uncomfortable. Doctors were consulted, sometimes. Their advice varied. Eat warm foods, avoid cold air, balance your humors. People nodded politely, then did whatever they planned to do anyway. Medical authority was respected, but not trusted fully, especially when outcomes were unpredictable. When someone recovered, it was celebrated quietly. No announcements, no gatherings. Just relief. Recovery didn't mean safety, it meant survival. People treated recovered neighbors carefully. Better, stronger, or possibly dangerous. No one was sure, so caution remained. Time passed strangely. Days felt long, weeks blurred. Without milestones, people measured time by mood. Before that scare, after that rumor. Calendars mattered less. Memory mattered more. And memory is unreliable, which is how myths begin. By the end of this phase, ordinary people weren't panicking. They weren't calm either. They were adjusted. Their lives were smaller, their focus narrower. But they were still living, still laughing quietly, still arguing over nonsense, still finding ways to fill the hours. Because when facts fail and fear gets boring, humans adapt. They create meaning. They create routine. They tell stories, even if those stories are wrong. Especially then. And tomorrow, unless something changed dramatically, they would wake up, listen for familiar sounds, and continue. Not brave, not hopeless. Just used to it.
Hey guys, let's just keep floating. By now, no one remembered exactly when things had changed. There was no announcement. No single bad week everyone agreed on. Normal didn't end, it just changed clothes and hoped no one would comment. People stopped saying during the plague, they said these days, which is always a sign that something has settled in. Daily life continued to narrow, not dramatically, not all at once, just in small, almost polite ways. People planned less far ahead. A week felt ambitious. A month felt
fictional. So lives shrank to manageable sizes. Today, tomorrow, market day. Anything beyond that was optional. Work patterns adjusted again. Some jobs vanished quietly, no closure, just absence. Others became essential overnight. Gravediggers, of course, but we're not focusing on them yet. This part is still about when no one was dying. Cleaners, washers, people who moved things without asking questions. They stayed busy. Everyone else learned to look busy. Idleness made people nervous. If you weren't doing something, you had time to think, and thinking too much was dangerous. So people invented tasks, organizing, reorganizing, fixing things that were already fixed. A loose board became a project. A cracked pot became a concern. Busy hands, quiet mind. Homes reflected this shift. They became more orderly, or more cluttered. Both were attempts at control. Some people scrubbed obsessively. Others let mess pile up. Either way, the house absorbed the anxiety. Furniture stopped moving. Once a setup felt safe, it stayed that way. Change felt risky. Social boundaries hardened gently. Not walls, lines. Who you saw regularly, who you didn't. Friend groups became smaller. Not because of arguments, because effort was limited. You spent energy where it felt safest. Familiar faces, predictable conversations. Surprise became exhausting. Greetings changed. Handshakes faded. Hugs became rare. People nodded more, smiled with their eyes. Language adapted without anyone noticing. Phrases appeared. Keeping to ourselves, being careful, not taking chances. All ways of saying the same thing. We're scared, but politely. Children grew into this version of normal. They didn't remember before clearly, not emotionally. This was their baseline now. Quiet streets, careful adults, rules that didn't make sense but were followed anyway. Don't touch that. Don't go there. Don't ask why. Kids learned quickly when questions ended conversations, so they stopped asking. They watched instead, which made them older, faster. Education became practical. Reading if possible, counting if useful, but more importantly, observing. Children learned how adults behaved under pressure and absorbed it. Religion settled into something flatter. Less fear, less hope. More habit. People still attended services when they could, still lit candles, but prayers became shorter. Not because faith weakened, because expectations did. People didn't ask for protection anymore. They asked for steadiness. Let things stay like this. This, imperfect as it was, felt survivable. Rumors didn't stop. They stabilized. Certain ideas stuck around. Cold air was bad. Warm food was good. Some herbs mattered. Others didn't. Once a belief proved comforting, it became tradition. Doctors adapted too. They spoke more cautiously. Less certainty, more observation, which made them sound wise, and also unhelpful. People appreciated honesty now. I don't know felt better than false confidence. Town officials stopped trying to enforce everything. They focused on appearances. Visible order mattered. Clean streets, calm announcements. If things looked controlled, people felt calmer. This was governance by vibes. And it worked, mostly. Public punishments decreased, not out of mercy, out of optics. Crowds were unpredictable, better to handle things quietly. So disputes were settled privately, fines instead of spectacles. Conflict softened. Not disappeared, just lowered in volume. Travel resumed slowly. Short distances first. Visits to nearby villages, quick errands. People returned with stories. Nothing happened. Everything looked the same, which was comforting. Normalcy spread not through safety, but through familiarity. If others were still functioning, maybe you could too. Clothing reflected mood. Muted colors, durable fabrics. Fashion became conservative. Standing out felt risky. Better to blend in, be forgettable. Being memorable had downsides. People started to measure health differently, not by strength, by consistency.
If someone showed up every day, they were healthy. If someone disappeared for a few days, concern followed. Absence mattered more than symptoms. People learned to perform wellness, walking steadily, speaking clearly, looking fine, which is a word doing a lot of work here. Emotions flattened, not numb, regulated. Too much joy felt reckless. Too much sadness felt dangerous. So people hovered in the middle, calm, neutral, survival-friendly. Music didn't disappear. It softened. Singing at home, quiet instruments. Public performances were rare, but people hummed. Humming was safe. It filled silence without attracting attention. Food culture adapted. Preservation became popular. Pickling, drying, storing. People prepared for shortages that might never come. Preparedness felt empowering. Even if nothing happened, having something ready helped. Nighttime routines solidified. Lock doors, check windows. Say prayers, sleep lightly. Dreams changed. More repetition, more familiar faces. The mind didn't want novelty either. Memory became selective. People forgot timelines, dates, but remembered feelings. That sense of unease, of watchfulness, which lingered. And slowly this version of life stopped feeling temporary. Not permanent, just ongoing. People didn't say, when this ends. They said, if things change, which is different. Change felt optional now. And that's the strange thing about humans. We adapt not just to danger, but to its absence. When no one was dying and no disaster arrived on schedule, life filled the space, carefully, quietly, with routines that worked well enough. And tomorrow, people would wake up, step into this new normal, and not question it too much. Because questioning required energy, and energy was better saved, just in case.
Hey guys, still here, still floating. By the time we reached this part, something important had happened, and almost no one noticed it happening. People stopped waiting for the plague to leave. Not consciously, not out loud. They just stopped factoring its departure into their thinking, which is a very human thing to do. When a threat doesn't resolve itself quickly, the mind files it away as background noise, like traffic or bad weather, or that one neighbor who always coughs a little too much. Life didn't feel normal, but it felt workable, and workable was enough. Ordinary people became experts in emotional moderation. Not optimism, not despair. A careful middle ground. You didn't want to seem careless, but you also didn't want to seem panicked. Both drew attention, and attention felt unsafe. So people cultivated an expression. Calm, slightly tired, mildly concerned. The perfect plague-era face. Social interactions reflected this. Conversations avoided extremes. No big dreams, no big fears. Just updates. How are you? Still well? That's good. And then a pause. A shared understanding. We won't push this further. People learned how to end conversations gently, before emotions crept in, before questions got uncomfortable. Politeness became a shield. Workplaces adjusted again. Some people returned to old jobs. Others found new ones that hadn't existed before. Delivering goods, cleaning shared spaces, watching gates. Jobs tied to movement and monitoring became valuable. Staying informed was suddenly a skill. Who was sick? Who wasn't? Who might be? Information traveled quietly, not publicly, through whispers, through glances. People learned how to read rooms. If a space felt tense, you left. If people stood too close together, you repositioned. Spatial awareness improved dramatically. Homes became emotional centers. The outside world felt unpredictable. Home felt controlled. People invested in their living spaces. Small decorations, rearranged furniture, not for beauty, for comfort. A familiar chair, a favorite corner. places where the mind could rest. Family dynamics shifted. Some families grew closer, shared meals, shared routines. Others grew strained. Too much proximity, too little privacy. Arguments happened quietly, not explosive, exhausted. People didn't have energy for dramatic conflict. They argued about small things, noise, mess, timing, because small things felt manageable. Bigger fears stayed unspoken. Children absorbed this atmosphere completely. They learned what adults valued now: calm behavior, compliance, awareness. Kids who were quiet were praised. Kids who asked too many questions were redirected. Curiosity was gently discouraged. Safety came first. Play continued, but it was restrained. Children invented rules that mirrored adult caution, boundaries, safe zones. They practiced distance without knowing why, which is how habits become instinct. Education, where it existed, focused on repetition, reading familiar texts, practicing known skills. Learning new things felt optional. Stability mattered more than growth. Religion became deeply personal. Public rituals stayed minimal. Private faith flourished. People developed individualized spiritual routines, morning prayers, evening rituals. Not dramatic, just consistent. Consistency became sacred. Doctors, healers, and herbalists remained part of daily life. People consulted them for reassurance as much as treatment. Being told you looked fine mattered. It calmed the imagination. Medical advice still varied. People picked what aligned with their routines. Eat this, avoid that. Once something felt helpful, it stayed, even if it wasn't. Town authorities focused on maintaining calm. Announcements were carefully worded. No urgency, no reassurance, just information. Sometimes outdated, but delivered confidently. Confidence mattered more than accuracy. Markets stabilized at a smaller scale. Fewer vendors, fewer customers, but predictable. Predictability rebuilt trust. People knew when to go, where to stand, which stalls felt safe. Shopping became efficient. No browsing, no lingering, in and out. Public spaces felt transitional. You passed through them, you didn't stay. Gatherings were rare but meaningful. Small celebrations happened quietly. Birthdays, marriages, scaled down. No crowds, no noise. Joy expressed carefully, as if joy itself might tempt fate. Music continued to soften. Instruments played behind closed doors. Singing stayed low. Loud expression felt inappropriate. Even happiness learned to whisper. Night remained the most vulnerable time. People still checked doors twice, still listened, but fear had dulled. It didn't spike as often. It sat quietly in the chest, manageable. Dreams reflected this. Less chaos, more repetition. Dreaming of ordinary days, which meant the mind was adapting. Adaptation didn't feel heroic. It felt boring, which was a relief. People stopped imagining worst-case scenarios daily, not because danger was gone, because imagining it was exhausting. Energy conservation became instinctive. If nothing bad happened today, that was a success. No need to analyze further. Time perception shifted again. Days felt shorter, weeks faster. Routine compressed experience. Life didn't feel full, but it felt steady, and steadiness mattered. People began to forget details of the early days, how scared they'd been, how uncertain everything felt. Memory softened the edges, which made the present feel easier. This is how humans survive prolonged uncertainty. We normalize it. We lower expectations. We adjust standards, and we tell ourselves, quietly, this is fine. Not convincingly, but convincingly enough. And tomorrow, people would wake up, dress in familiar clothes, step into familiar routines, and continue. Not because they were fearless, but because continuing had become automatic. And automatic was safer than thinking too hard, especially when no one was dying. Yet.
Hey guys, still drifting, still calm. By the time we reached this part, something subtle but important had taken hold. People stopped thinking of the world as wide, not because maps changed, but because attention did. Distance felt heavier now. Travel felt unnecessary. So the world became local, very local. For most ordinary people, life now existed in a small radius. Home, one or two familiar streets, the market, the church. Anything beyond that might as well have been a story. This shrinking didn't feel like loss, it felt like efficiency. Why think about faraway things when nearby ones required so much care? People curated their days carefully. They avoided extra errands, combined tasks. If you were already out, you did everything at once. Going home was the goal. Being outside too long felt exposed. Not dangerous, just tiring. Social circles contracted further. People invested deeply in a few relationships, not many. Too many people meant too many variables. Variables created uncertainty, and uncertainty was the enemy now. So friendships became intense and small. You trusted the people you saw regularly. You distrusted everyone else by default. Not emotionally, logistically. If you didn't know someone's routine, you didn't know their risk. Trust became procedural. Homes became quieter. Not silent, quieter. Less conversation, more shared presence. People sat together doing separate tasks, mending, sorting, counting. Company without interaction. This was comforting. It meant you weren't alone without requiring effort. Children learned to occupy themselves. They became very good at solitary play, drawing, stacking objects, watching adults. Imagination filled the gaps, but imagination stayed grounded. Fantasy shrank too. Heroes disappeared from stories. Everyday characters took their place. People told stories about survival, about cleverness, about endurance, not about glory. Education, such as it existed, followed suit. Learning became utilitarian. How to store food, how to recognize illness, how to read signs. Abstract thinking felt indulgent. Practical knowledge felt urgent. Religion settled into rhythm. Services happened, prayers were said, but belief softened. Not weakened, smoothed. People didn't wrestle with faith anymore. They used it as comfort, as structure, as something that made days predictable. Spiritual crises were postponed. There wasn't energy for them. Doctors and healers became routine figures, not saviors, consultants. You visited them to confirm what you already hoped, that you were fine, or at least fine enough. Medical language changed. Instead of cures, there were conditions. Instead of outcomes, probabilities. This suited the moment. Certainty was suspicious now. Markets reflected the smaller world. Goods were local. Exotic items vanished. No one missed them much. Familiar foods mattered more. People preferred what they recognized. Surprises weren't welcome. Clothing became uniform. Styles blurred. People wore what worked, what lasted. Fashion cycles paused. No one cared what was new. They cared what was clean and intact. Public behavior became coordinated without discussion.
People knew where to stand, how to move, like a slow, careful dance everyone learned by watching. Crowds didn't form easily. When they did, they dispersed quickly. No panic, just instinct. Space became valuable. Personal space became sacred. Touch declined further. Not forbidden, just rare. When it happened, it meant something. A hand on a shoulder, a brief embrace, carefully chosen, which made it powerful. Emotional expression continued to flatten. People didn't feel less, they expressed less, because expression demanded response, and responses were complicated. So feelings stayed contained. Contained feelings felt safer. Even grief adapted. When someone died, not of plague, just of life, mourning was restrained. No large gatherings, no extended rituals. Grief was private. Not because it mattered less, because managing it publicly felt overwhelming. Nighttime routines remained strict. People slept lighter, but they slept, which was progress. Sleep became an achievement, a sign that anxiety was manageable. Dreams continued to simplify. Ordinary dreams, walking familiar paths, repeating familiar actions. The mind liked predictability now. News from outside filtered in occasionally, but it felt distant, almost irrelevant. If something terrible happened elsewhere, it didn't change today's routine. People acknowledged it briefly, then returned to what they were doing. Empathy remained, but it was rationed. You couldn't feel everything, so you felt what was close. Time perception shifted again. Years didn't feel like years. They felt like extended seasons. No sharp edges, just long stretches. People marked time by habits. When we started doing that thing, when we stopped going there. Life milestones blurred. Birthdays passed quietly. Anniversaries noted briefly. The future wasn't ignored, it was softened. People still hoped, but gently. Hope became conditional. If things improve, then. But no urgency. Patience became automatic, not chosen, learned. And learned patience changed behavior. People moved slower, spoke slower, reacted slower. Not laziness, conservation. Because in a world where danger might return at any time, energy was precious. So the world shrank, and ordinary people accepted it. Not as defeat, as adaptation. And adaptation, as always, was quieter than anyone expected. Tomorrow would arrive, small, manageable, and that was enough.
Hey guys, still here, still moving gently forward. By now, time itself had changed texture. Not faster, not slower, just softer. Days no longer stacked neatly on top of each other. They melted together. People stopped counting in weeks. They counted in habits. Since we started doing that, back when we still went there, dates mattered less than patterns. Ordinary people didn't resist this. They leaned into it. Structure felt safer than precision. Mornings began the same way, almost everywhere. Wake up, listen. Not for alarms, for sounds. Footsteps outside, voices, carts. If the town sounded normal, the day felt possible. Silence was unsettling. Noise was reassurance. People dressed without much thought. The same clothes, again. Not out of neglect, out of preference. Familiar textures grounded the body. Meals followed routines too. Simple foods eaten at the same times. Not because clocks mattered, because hunger did. Eating became a checkpoint. If you were hungry, you were still functioning. Good. Work filled the middle of the day. Not intense work, maintenance work. Keeping things going. People repaired, cleaned, watched, waited.
Waiting wasn't passive anymore. It was an activity, a learned skill. You waited while doing something else. Hands busy, mind half occupied. Thinking directly about the future felt unnecessary. It would come whether you planned or not. Social interactions were minimal but steady. You saw the same faces, exchanged the same greetings. These interactions anchored time. If you saw them yesterday, today existed. Children grew noticeably during this period. Not dramatically, gradually. Adults marked time by children's changes. He's taller. Her voice is different. That's how you knew months had passed. Education continued informally. Children learned from observation, how to read moods, how to adapt behavior. They became emotionally literate early, which was useful and sad. Play stayed quiet, but imagination deepened. Kids created elaborate inner worlds because outer worlds were limited. Fantasy became internal. Dreams bled into waking thoughts. Religion remained stable, not intense, not fading, just present. A background structure. Prayers marked time. Morning, evening. They replaced bells. People found comfort in repetition. The same words, the same gestures. It made days feel complete. Doctors were consulted less frequently, not because people were healthier, because people were accustomed to minor discomfort. Unless something was severe, it was ignored. Tolerance increased, not bravely, practically. Public spaces we used efficiently. No loitering, no lingering. If you were there, you had a reason, and when the reason was done, you left. Markets felt like transit points. Get in, get out. Conversation happened, but briefly. No one wanted to stand around too long. Standing around invited thinking. Thinking invited anxiety. So movement continued. Homes remained the center. People spent long stretches indoors, not hiding, resting. Inside felt neutral. Outside required awareness. Families developed rhythms, shared silence, occasional conversation. Arguments flared rarely, but when they did, they burned quickly. No one wanted prolonged conflict. It wasted energy. Emotion regulation became communal. People mirrored each other's calm. If someone panicked, others lowered their voices, not to suppress them, to stabilize the room. Social regulation replaced authority. You didn't need rules when everyone knew the mood. Night came earlier, not physically, psychologically. People retreated indoors sooner. Darkness felt heavier, not scary, demanding. It asked for stillness. Candles were lit earlier. Rituals began earlier. Sleep followed routines strictly. Breaking routine made nights harder. Dreams continued their quiet repetition. Familiar places, familiar faces. The mind reused what it knew. Memory shifted again. People forgot exact sequences, what happened before what, but they remembered emotional phases. The anxious period, the quiet period, the time when nothing happened. This was the time when nothing happened, and that mattered, because humans expect stories to move. When they don't, we adapt. We stop anticipating change. We stop bracing. We just exist. And existence became the goal. Not thriving, not improving, just continuing. People didn't say it out loud, but they lived it. This was life now. Not temporary, not permanent, just ongoing. And when time lost its shape and days stopped demanding to be distinguished, ordinary people found something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness, not safety, but a low, steady calm. The kind that lets you sleep. The kind that lets you wake up and do it again. Tomorrow would arrive, unmarked, unremarkable. And no one would fight it, because fighting required energy,
and energy was better saved, just in case.
Hey guys, still with me? Still breathing evenly? By the time we reached this part, something almost invisible had settled in. Silence stopped feeling empty. It started feeling furnished. Not dramatic silence, not ominous, just the kind that sits with you, like an old chair that no one thinks to move anymore. Ordinary people had learned how to live inside quiet. Conversations became optional, not avoided, optional. You spoke when there was something to say. Otherwise, you shared space. And shared space turned out to be enough. Homes grew quieter, but not colder. People moved softly through rooms. They knew where things were. They knew where others were likely to be. This familiarity reduced friction. You didn't bump into each other emotionally anymore. Everyone knew the boundaries. Meals were often eaten in silence, not tense silence, neutral silence. The kind where spoons scrape bowls, bread breaks. These sounds counted as conversation now. Children adapted completely. They no longer asked what was happening out there. Out there was abstract. Here was real. They focused on immediate surroundings. They noticed details adults overlooked, patterns in walls, sounds in floors. They entertained themselves quietly, not because they were told to, because they'd learned how. Imagination became efficient. No wasted movement, no loud games. Fantasy existed, but internally. Children lived rich inner lives. Adults noticed this vaguely and felt conflicted, proud and a little sad. Work continued in this quieter mode. Tasks were completed steadily, no rush, no urgency. Deadlines softened. If something wasn't finished today, it would be finished tomorrow, assuming tomorrow behaved. This attitude reduced stress and also ambition. People stopped chasing progress. They maintained stability, which felt like wisdom. Public spaces reflected this calm. Streets weren't empty, they were restrained. People walked with purpose, no wandering, no browsing. If you were outside, you were doing something, and when you were done, you went home. Home was the reward. Markets operated smoothly. Everyone knew the routine, where to stand, when to move. Transaction replaced interaction. Efficient, polite. No lingering stories, no gossip traded loudly. Rumors still existed, but they circulated quietly, through tone, through implication, not through shouting. If something felt wrong, people sensed it. Words weren't always necessary. Religion continued its steady presence. Faith didn't flare, it glowed. Rituals were dependable. Candles, prayers. They marked time. They marked transitions. They gave days a beginning and an end. Which mattered. Doctors and healers became background figures, still respected, less consulted. People trusted their own judgment more now. They knew their bodies. They knew what felt normal. Anything outside that would be noticed. Until then, they carried on. Touch remained rare, but when it happened, it lingered. A hand passed an object, a brief brush. These moments registered. They grounded people in physical reality, which was comforting. Emotional expression stayed contained, not suppressed, contained. People felt deeply, but privately. Public emotion felt disruptive, like noise in a quiet room. So feelings were processed alone, or with one trusted person. Grief, when it appeared, was slow, not dramatic. It unfolded over time. Quiet tears, private moments. No urgency to move on. Time allowed for lingering.
Nighttime routines was sacred. People prepared for sleep deliberately. Doors checked, candles set, prayers said. Sleep was valued. Sleep meant rest. Rest meant resilience. Dreams became calm, not joyful, not frightening, neutral. Walking familiar paths, seeing familiar faces. The mind recycled known images. It didn't seek excitement. Memory continued to blur edges. Early fear felt distant, like a story someone else told. People remembered they had once been scared, but not how it felt. This made current calm feel earned, even if nothing had been resolved. News from outside arrived occasionally. It was received politely, listened to, then placed gently aside. If it didn't affect today, it didn't demand attention. Empathy remained selective. People cared, but they cared sustainably. They didn't exhaust themselves on distant suffering. This wasn't cruelty, it was conservation. Time continued its soft march. Days passed without markers. But people felt older. Not physically, mentally. More patient, less reactive. Life had taught them how to wait, and waiting had taught them how to be still. This stillness wasn't emptiness. It was full of routine, full of small comforts, full of manageable expectations. The plague, when no one was dying, had reshaped ordinary life into something quieter, smaller, but strangely stable. And people lived inside that stability, not celebrating it, not questioning it, just inhabiting it. Tomorrow would arrive, like today did, quietly, and silence would be there to meet it, comfortable, well practiced, no longer asking to be filled.
Hey guys, still steady, still slow. By this point, fear had changed jobs. It no longer stood at the front of the room, waving its arms. It moved into the background and handled logistics. Fear became administrative. It managed behavior quietly, and because of that, people stopped thinking about it directly. Ordinary people didn't wake up afraid anymore. They woke up cautious, which felt different. Fear was loud, caution was practical, and practical emotions are easier to live with. People still avoided certain streets, still watched certain houses, but they didn't think about why as much. It was habit now. Don't go there. Don't linger. These were rules without explanations, which made them feel solid. Conversations reflected this shift. No one said, "I'm scared of the plague." They said, "Better not. Better not go today. Better not invite people over. Better not take chances." Language softened fear into suggestion, and suggestion felt manageable. Work life stabilized further. People accepted their roles. Some roles shrunk, others had expanded, but complaining felt pointless. This was the arrangement. Energy went into maintaining balance, not improving it. Ambition dulled, not disappeared, just postponed. You didn't stop wanting more, you stopped planning for it. Children barely remembered anything else. This was their normal. They didn't ask why adults behaved this way. They assumed adults always had, which is how generational shifts happen, quietly, without debate. Education continued in fragments. Children learned skills adults valued now: patience, observation, knowing when to speak, knowing when not to. These weren't listed lessons, they were absorbed. Adults watched children grow calmer, more restrained, and felt a mix of pride and unease, but there was no alternative. Public spaces grew even more functional. Benches existed, but few people sat. People didn't pause unless necessary. Pausing felt indulgent. Movement felt purposeful. Even leisure had structure. If people rested, they rested intentionally, sitting still at home, listening. Rest wasn't accidental, it was scheduled. Religion remained constant, not intense, not absent, just present. Church bells marked time. People listened, nodded internally, and continued. Faith wasn't debated, it was used. Doctors faded slightly from focus, not because illness was gone,
because uncertainty had become tolerable. People no longer sought reassurance for every sensation. They trusted patterns. If something felt familiar, it was ignored. If something felt new, it was monitored. This internal monitoring replaced panic. Medical authority was internalized, which honestly was impressive. Touch remained rare, but emotional distance grew even more. Not coldness, boundaries. People respected emotional space. They didn't pry. They didn't push. Curiosity about others' health or feelings felt inappropriate. Privacy expanded. Grief adapted again. When someone died, it was acknowledged, but life didn't stop. Funerals were small, mourning private. This wasn't heartlessness, it was exhaustion. Communal grief required energy people didn't have. Better to grieve quietly, alone, or with one person. Nighttime remained a time of reflection, but even that softened. People didn't lie awake imagining disaster. They thought about tomorrow's tasks, what needed to be done. This was progress. Sleep improved, which improved everything else. Dreams remained familiar. No chaos, no novelty. The mind avoided surprises. Memory continued to reshape itself. Early days blurred. Fear felt distant. People remembered they had been worried, but not why. Which was strange, but also freeing. News from outside felt like fiction. Distant plagues, distant disasters. People listened politely, then returned to what mattered. Here. Now. Empathy remained, but with limits. People learned to care without absorbing. This was emotional maturity born of necessity. Time passed, years even, and life remained stable. Not good, not bad, just stable. The plague still existed as a concept, but it no longer dominated thought. It became one risk among many, like fire, like famine, something to consider, not something to fear constantly. People forgot the sharp edge of fear. They remembered caution, which was enough. And when fear loses its sharpness, it stops demanding attention. It becomes background noise, and background noise, after a while, is barely noticed. Tomorrow would come, like always, and people would wake up, move through familiar routines, and continue. Not because they were fearless, but because fear had quietly done its job and stepped aside.
Hey guys, still here, still moving slowly. By now, normal had settled in like it planned to stay. Not the old normal, that one was gone. This was a thinner version, quieter, more careful, but it worked. People stopped comparing life to how it used to be. Comparison required memory, and memory, at this point, was selective. You remembered routines, you remembered faces, but expectations faded. Ordinary people didn't say things used to be better. They said, this is how it is. And that sentence carried a lot of peace. Mornings began predictably. Light entered rooms, people rose. No one rushed. Urgency had burned itself out earlier. Now mornings were procedural. Wash, dress, eat. The order mattered more than speed. Doing things correctly felt grounding. It reassured people that life still followed rules, even if the world didn't. Work blended into life seamlessly. There was no strong division. Tasks happened because they needed to, not because they led anywhere. Purpose replaced progress, which felt calmer. Craftspeople focused on maintenance, repairing instead of creating, fixing instead of expanding. This wasn't stagnation, it was sustainability. Farmers adjusted planting schedules. They planted what could survive neglect, not what promised abundance. Survival crops, reliable ones, nothing flashy. And the land responded well to this honesty. Children grew into this world without resistance. They learned boundaries early. They understood space. They knew not everything was meant to be touched or shared. They weren't fearful, they were aware, which adults recognized as maturity. Too early, maybe, but effective. Education happened through observation. Children watched adults closely. They learned when to speak, when to listen, when silence was expected. They absorbed emotional restraint as a default setting. Adults sometimes missed noise, laughter that spilled out, arguments that felt alive, but they didn't chase those things. They remembered the cost.
Public gatherings remained minimal, not forbidden, just unnecessary. If people met, it was intentional. Small numbers, short durations. Enough to maintain connection, not enough to disrupt stability. Friendships became quieter, deeper in some ways, shallower in others. People didn't share everything, they shared what mattered, which reduced emotional clutter. Romantic relationships adapted too. Less dramatic, less performative. Affection expressed through consistency, showing up, staying, not leaving. Promises were small and kept. Religion continued to hum along, not loudly, not urgently. It offered rhythm, weekly markers, familiar words. Faith functioned like furniture, always there, not actively noticed, but missed if removed. Medical knowledge continued its background role. People still treated symptoms, but they stopped obsessing over causes. If you felt well, you assumed you were. If you didn't, you rested. This trust in the body was practical and surprisingly effective. Touch slowly, carefully returned, not in crowds, not casually, but within households, between people who shared space. It felt significant. Touch regained meaning. It wasn't wasted. Emotions stabilized. People experienced fewer extremes, less panic, less joy, mostly middle ground, which allowed for endurance. Grief remained present, but predictable. People expected loss eventually. This expectation softened impact. When death occurred, it wasn't shocking. It was acknowledged, processed, integrated. Then life resumed. Nighttime became deeply familiar. The same sounds, the same shadows. People slept easily because uncertainty had become routine. The unknown wasn't threatening anymore. It was just part of the environment. Dreams reflected this acceptance. People dreamed of ordinary tasks, walking, sitting, talking quietly. The mind practiced normalcy even at rest. Memory continued to reorganize. The past became vague, the present detailed. People remembered what to do tomorrow, not what they'd lost years ago. This wasn't denial, it was adaptation. News from elsewhere felt distant, interesting but not actionable. People learned the difference between information and relevance. They listened politely, then returned to their lives. Empathy existed, but with boundaries. People cared without carrying weight that wasn't theirs. This emotional economy prevented burnout. Time passed steadily. Seasons changed. People noticed small things, weather patterns, light shifts. Life became granular, detailed, less abstract, and strangely satisfying. The plague, when no one was dying, had become part of the background architecture of life. Not a monster, not a villain, just a condition. And ordinary people lived inside that condition. They didn't celebrate resilience. They didn't name it. They simply practiced it daily. Normal wasn't exciting, but it was livable. And for people who had learned how fragile excitement could be, livable was more than enough. Tomorrow would come, tasks would be done, silence would remain, and ordinary life would continue. Not loudly, not proudly, just steadily, which in the end was exactly what people needed.
Hey guys. Still here. Still drifting. By the time we reached this stretch of the story, something subtle had happened to time itself. It didn't stop. It didn't rush. It softened. Ordinary people began to feel time passing in layers instead of jolts. Days didn't feel chopped into urgent pieces anymore. They felt stretched, elastic. Morning slowly became afternoon. Afternoon gently leaned into evening. Nothing snapped. This made life feel heavier in a good way, more solid. People noticed things they used to skip over. How long it took water to boil. How light shifted across walls. How footsteps sounded different at different hours. These observations weren't hobbies. They were side effects of reduced urgency. When nothing was chasing you, your attention wandered inward. Work rhythms adjusted again. People worked until a task felt complete. not until a bell rang. If something took longer, it took longer. Time was no longer something to beat. It was something to move alongside. This changed how people judged themselves. Productivity lost its edge. Being useful mattered more than being efficient. A cobbler who fixed fewer shoes carefully was valued more than one who rushed. Care became a currency. Mistakes were expensive emotionally now. Fixing them took time people didn't want to waste. So people moved slower, more deliberately. Children adapted effortlessly. They grew up without clocks dominating their days. Time was measured by events, meals, light, rest. They knew when it was late by feeling, not by numbers. This made them calm, sometimes eerily calm. Adults noticed and tried not to think too hard about it. Education leaned into repetition. The same lessons told again and again. Not because children were slow, because repetition soothed everyone involved. Familiarity felt safe. Surprise felt unnecessary. Public spaces reflected this slower relationship with time. Markets opened when people arrived, closed when they left. No strict hours, just shared understanding. If someone was late, it didn't mean anything. Late compared to what? Schedules lost authority. Routines replaced them. Religion mirrored this softness. Services felt timeless. No one rushed prayers. No one hurried sermons. Faith wasn't about salvation timelines. It was about presence, being there. Medical care followed the same pattern. Doctors spent longer with patients, not because they had better answers, because listening mattered. Sometimes that was the treatment. People expected this. They didn't want speed. They wanted attention. Touch continued its careful return. People hugged longer, held hands a moment extra. These weren't emotional displays. They were grounding techniques, reminders of physical reality. Emotions unfolded slowly. Anger faded before becoming sharp. Sadness stretched, without collapsing into despair. Joy arrived quietly and stayed briefly. People didn't chase it. They acknowledged it, then let it go. Grief continued its calm evolution. People grieved in waves, small ones, returning again and again. This felt manageable. No pressure to move on. Time handled that. Nighttime became deeply reflective. People sat in darkness without discomfort. They thought about small things. A conversation. A task unfinished. Big questions felt too heavy and unnecessary. Sleep arrived gently, not from exhaustion, from readiness. Dreams slowed too. Long sequences, walking long roads, sitting near water. The mind practiced patience. Memory continued reshaping. People remembered how things felt more than what happened. Dates blurred. Feelings remained. The past softened. The future shortened. People planned days, not years. This made disappointment rare. News from outside still arrived, but urgency was filtered out. People asked, does this affect tomorrow? If not, it waited. Empathy became quieter.
People cared deeply for what they could touch, less for what they couldn't. This wasn't cruelty. It was realism. Time taught limits. Years passed like this, quietly, without milestones. People aged without noticing, until one day they did, and accepted it. Life felt longer, not because it was, but because it wasn't rushed. The plague, when no one was dying, had taught ordinary people something strange. Time didn't need to be conquered. It needed to be lived inside. Slowly, gently, moment by moment. Tomorrow would come. Not faster, not slower. Just when it was ready. And people would be there to meet it. Unhurried, present, still breathing evenly.
Hey guys, still calm, still drifting. Somewhere along the way, people stopped asking the question they used to whisper at night. When will this be over? Not because it had ended, and not because they'd given up. The question just dissolved. It turned out that constantly waiting for an ending was exhausting, so ordinary people quietly retired the idea. Life wasn't something to pause until a resolution arrived. It was something that continued, regardless of whether answers showed up. And once that realization settled in, everything loosened. People stopped living in anticipation. They lived in sequence. Today followed yesterday. Tomorrow followed today. That was enough structure. Mornings felt less loaded. You didn't wake up wondering if this would be the day everything changed. You woke up knowing it probably wouldn't. And that predictability felt kind. People planned in short arcs. What to cook, what to mend, what to clean. These small plans gave shape to days. Long-term plans felt unnecessary, not forbidden, just irrelevant. Why plan for a future that would arrive on its own terms anyway? Work reflected this mindset. Projects weren't framed as steps towards something bigger. They were framed as things worth doing by themselves. Fixing a roof wasn't preparation. It was the roof needing to be fixed. That simplicity removed anxiety. Completion became satisfying again, not because it advanced life, because it closed a loop. Children grew up without someday looming over them. Adults didn't say, when things go back to normal. They said, this is how we do things. Children accepted this easily. They didn't feel deprived. They felt oriented. They knew where they belonged. Education followed this acceptance. Lessons focused on practical continuity, how to keep things working, how to notice problems early, how to adapt without panic. These weren't dramatic skills, they were durable ones. Public life stabilized into something almost peaceful. Not lively, peaceful. People greeted each other briefly. Nods replaced words. Everyone understood the shared context. No explanations needed. Markets felt almost meditative. The rhythm of exchange was slow, predictable. Familiar faces, familiar gestures. Commerce felt less like ambition and more like maintenance. Religion continued quietly, not offering answers, offering repetition. People didn't ask faith to explain suffering. They asked it to mark time. Holidays still existed, but they were subdued, acknowledged, observed, not celebrated loudly. The meaning mattered more than the mood. Medical care continued to blend into daily life. Doctors were consulted calmly, no desperation. People trusted observation. If symptoms stayed mild, life continued. If they changed, attention followed. This approach reduced fear, not because danger vanished, but because response felt proportionate. Touch, by now, had fully reclaimed its place, not universally, but naturally. People hugged family, sat close, shared warmth.
touch wasn't taken for granted, which made it valuable. Emotional expressions softened further. People didn't seek emotional highs, they valued steadiness. Arguments were rare, not because people agreed, because disagreement felt like effort, and effort was reserved for necessities. Grief became fully integrated into life. People carried loss without letting it define them. They didn't recover, they adjusted. Loss became part of identity, not the headline. Nighttime thoughts changed again. People no longer rehearsed worst-case scenarios. They reviewed the day, what went well, what needed attention tomorrow. Sleep came easily, because minds weren't racing ahead anymore. Dreams reflected acceptance. People dreamed of staying, not escaping. Sitting, watching, waiting. Memory continued its quiet editing. Early uncertainty faded further. People remembered adapting more than fearing. The narrative shifted. They told stories about learning, not surviving. News from outside continued to feel distant. People listened, absorbed what was useful, let the rest pass through. They had learned discernment. Empathy stayed intact, but contained. People cared deeply for their immediate world and accepted that caring beyond that had limits. Time passed without ceremony. Years didn't feel dramatic, they felt cumulative. People aged gently, not because life was easy, but because it wasn't constantly spiking their nervous systems. The plague, when no one was dying, had quietly taught ordinary people something profound. Endings weren't guaranteed, and that was okay. Life didn't need closure to be lived well. It needed attention, presence, and the willingness to continue without answers. Tomorrow would arrive, not as a promise, not as a threat, just another day, and people would step into it without asking when it would end, because they had learned how to live while it continued.
Hey guys, still here, still unhurried. By this stage, life had become noticeably smaller. Not poorer, not emptier, just reduced. And that reduction made it easier to carry. Ordinary people stopped stretching themselves thin across imaginary futures and distant worries. They lived closer to the center of things, closer to home, closer to routine, closer to what they could actually affect. Days had clear edges now. They began, they ended. What happened inside them mattered. What didn't gently faded. People noticed that they no longer felt pulled in many directions. There was no pressure to keep up, no invisible race. Life wasn't asking them to be more. It was asking them to be present. Work continued in this compact form. People did fewer things, but they did them thoroughly. Multitasking disappeared. It felt unnecessary. You worked on one thing until it was done. Then you rested. Then you moved on. This rhythm felt natural, like breathing. Crafts became slower still. Objects lasted longer. People repaired items repeatedly instead of replacing them. There was pride in longevity. A bowl that had been fixed 3 times told a story, a good story. Children grew up surrounded by these repaired objects. They learned that things weren't disposable. Neither were people. Education leaned even more heavily into observation. Children watched adults handle problems calmly. They learned that frustration didn't require spectacle. You noticed an issue, you addressed it, quietly, without drama. Adults noticed children asking fewer why questions, not because curiosity died, because answers were visible. Life demonstrated itself. Public spaces felt almost intimate. Even towns felt like extended households. People recognized each other without knowing names. Faces mattered more than identities. You knew who belonged, not officially, just intuitively.
Markets felt familiar enough that words were optional. A nod, a gesture. Everyone knew the process. Commerce became trust-based, not idealistic trust, functional trust. You didn't need receipts. You remembered. Religion continued to offer its steady frame. People appreciated its predictability, not its promises. Faith became less about hope, more about orientation, a way to stand in the world. Medical care was fully normalized. Illness wasn't moralized. Health wasn't bragged about. Bodies did what bodies did. People responded accordingly. No guilt, no panic. Touch felt fully restored in appropriate spaces. People leaned into one another during long silences, sat close during cold evenings, shared warmth without commentary. It wasn't emotional. It was practical. Emotions themselves continued to flatten gently, not numb, even. People felt things, but those feelings passed through without lingering turbulence. Anger dissolved quickly. Sadness settled quietly. Joy appeared briefly, then moved on. No one clung to it. This emotional moderation made relationships stable, less explosive, less fragile. Arguments ended faster. Forgiveness happened quietly, not ceremonially. Grief became a constant companion, not overwhelming, just present. People spoke of the dead naturally, not in hushed tones, not dramatically. They referenced them like absent neighbors, still part of the mental landscape. Nighttime felt safe. Darkness wasn't threatening anymore. It was familiar. People sat in it comfortably. Thoughts wandered gently. Nothing demanded resolution. Sleep came without resistance. Dreams were simple, domestic, repeating familiar patterns. The mind rehearsed stability. Memory continued its careful pruning. People remembered routines clearly, events vaguely. Dates meant little. Seasons mattered more. Life organized itself around cycles, not milestones. News from outside became background texture. People listened with polite interest, but didn't internalize urgency. They had learned the cost of carrying too much. Empathy remained focused. People showed deep care for those near them and accepted distance elsewhere. This acceptance wasn't cold. It was honest. Time felt dense, not long, dense. Each day contained weight, meaning, not excitement, meaning. People aged gradually, not dramatically. They noticed changes without panic. Wrinkles, stiffness. These were expected. They were signs of continuity. The plague, when no one was dying, had reshaped life into something smaller. But that smallness created space. Space for attention, for steadiness, for endurance. Ordinary people didn't feel heroic. They didn't feel special. They felt settled. And in a world that had once felt fragile and loud, settled felt like a quiet victory. Tomorrow would come. It wouldn't demand much, and people would meet it with smaller lives and steadier hands. Still breathing evenly.
Hey guys, still here, still quiet. By the time we reach this final stretch, something important becomes clear. Nothing ever went back. Not fully, not neatly. And strangely, no one was waiting for it anymore. Ordinary people stopped measuring life against what it used to be. They stopped holding old versions of the world up like a reference image. That comparison muscle had gone unused for too long, and it had weakened. What remained was a present that functioned, not impressively, not beautifully, but reliably. And reliability, after everything,
felt luxurious. People didn't talk about before much now, not because it was forbidden, because it felt irrelevant. The past existed like an old house you once lived in. You remembered the layout. You didn't want to move back. Daily life continued in its reduced, steady form. People woke, worked, rested. They repeated these motions without resentment. Repetition wasn't boring anymore. It was reassuring. Knowing what came next made space for calm. Work had fully detached from identity. People weren't what they did, they were who they showed up for. Tasks mattered because they sustained life, not because they proved worth. This shift quietly healed a lot of old anxieties. People no longer felt behind. Behind what? There was no schedule to miss. Children grew into adults without ever knowing the urgency their parents once carried. They didn't feel robbed. They felt grounded. They understood limits instinctively. They didn't push against walls that wouldn't move. They navigated around them. Education had completed its transformation. No grand ideals, no lofty ambitions, just competence, adaptability, knowing how to keep life running. And these adults were good at it. Public life remained minimal but warm. People greeted each other with recognition, not curiosity. Everyone knew enough. No one needed more. Community existed without spectacle, without meetings, without declarations. It existed through consistency. Religion settled into something almost invisible. It marked time, held space. It didn't ask for devotion. It offered familiarity. Medical care became part of background maintenance. Bodies aged, people noticed, they adjusted. There was no war against decline, just accommodation. Touch remained meaningful, never careless, never withheld. People understood its value now and used it intentionally. Emotional life stabilized into something durable. People felt fewer extremes, but they also felt fewer collapses. Happiness wasn't chased. Contentment was recognized when it appeared and allowed to pass without panic. Grief remained, always, but it no longer disrupted life's flow. It flowed alongside it. Loss didn't stop people, it shaped them. Nighttime remained a trusted companion. Darkness wasn't feared, silence wasn't suspicious. People rested deeply because they weren't bracing for sudden change anymore. Dreams were quiet, repetitive, comforting. The mind rehearsed continuation. Memory had done its final edits. The sharpest fear was gone. What remained was knowledge. People remembered adapting. They remembered learning. They remembered becoming quieter versions of themselves, and they liked those versions. News from the outside world still arrived, but it never shook the center. People listened, nodded, returned to their lives. They knew now that not everything required response. Empathy remained strong, but focused. People cared deeply where care mattered. They accepted that caring had limits, and that limits protected compassion. Time continued, unimpressed, unrushed. People aged, children replaced elders. Life folded forward, not dramatically, just steadily. The plague, when no one was dying, never delivered a clear ending. There was no moment when people stood up and said, "It's over." Instead, it dissolved into the fabric of life, into habits, into expectations, into quieter ways of being. And ordinary people didn't emerge triumphant. They emerged adjusted, which turned out to be enough. Nothing went back, but nothing needed to. Life didn't return to what it was. It became what it could be. Smaller, slower, steadier. And people lived inside that world, not loudly, not proudly, just calmly.
breathing evenly, and continuing, one ordinary day at a time.
Hey guys, here we are, at the final stretch. Still calm, still present. By now, something remarkable had happened, even if no one would have called it remarkable at the time. Ordinary people had become masters of life without spectacle. Not heroes, not survivors in the dramatic sense, just practitioners of continuity. They had learned how to live inside uncertainty without letting it dominate them. They had learned how to continue while waiting for nothing. And they had learned how to notice the small details that made life livable. Mornings had a rhythm that no clock dictated. Sunlight, footsteps, distant sounds, they all signaled the start of day. People rose with intention, not panic. They dressed efficiently. They ate efficiently. And they left the house only when necessary, carrying out each movement as if it were both ordinary and meaningful. Work existed in harmony with life. Tasks were chosen because they were necessary, not because they proved ambition. Craftsmen repaired instead of replacing. Farmers tended the same plots season after season. Children helped with measured attention, absorbing the ways of the world without fuss. Social life had transformed into a system of quiet recognition. You greeted neighbors with nods, exchanged minimal words, communicated more with gestures than with speech. Community cohesion no longer required meetings or proclamations. It existed in the very rhythm of daily life. Education had matured into a lived experience. Children learned through observation and repetition. Lessons were practical. Patience, consistency, resourcefulness, these were the curriculum. They learned to wait, to notice, to act deliberately. Curiosity persisted, but it was measured and functional. Emotional life had flattened into something surprisingly sustainable. People felt deeply, but they didn't collapse into extremes. Anger passed quickly. Sadness was acknowledged but integrated. Joy appeared softly, briefly, and without dramatics. Grief was present but no longer disruptive. It was the constant companion of ordinary existence, handled gracefully, quietly. Touch, once rare, returned intentionally. A hand on a shoulder, a brief embrace. Comfort became deliberate. People realized the value of presence over gesture. Nighttime remained sacred. Darkness was not feared. Silence was not unsettling. People rested fully, having mastered the rhythm of quiet. Dreams mirrored waking life, repetitive, familiar, grounded. Memory, softened over years, focused on lessons learned rather than disasters endured. News from the outside world still arrived occasionally. People listened, assessed relevance, and then returned to their lives. Empathy was focused and efficient. They cared deeply where care was needed and let go gracefully where it wasn't. Time itself seemed to bend in alignment with this new way of being, not rushed, not compressed, not punctuated by fear or urgency, just continuous, steady, manageable. Days became loops of habitual stability, repeated and refined. Years passed almost unnoticed, but they carried forward accumulated skill, resilience, and understanding. By this point, ordinary people didn't need endings. Closure was irrelevant. Life was its own process. Normalcy didn't return because there was no going back. Instead, life became smaller, slower, quieter, and more sustainable. And here is the quiet mastery that no one celebrated. They had learned how to be present without panic. They had learned how to move deliberately, speak minimally, and rest intentionally. They had learned how to preserve energy, manage relationships, and maintain stability. They had learned how to notice the small details that made life livable. They had learned how to continue. The plague, when no one was dying, had become a teacher, and ordinary people had become its students, quietly, without ceremony. And now,
Having lived this way for months, years, maybe decades, they didn't emerge triumphant, dramatic, or glorified. They simply existed. And in the calm, slow, steady flow of existence, they found something rare: peace. Peace that was earned not through victory or heroism, but through the mundane mastery of ordinary life. Tomorrow would arrive. They would meet it, not with fear, not with ambition, not with anticipation. Just presence. Quiet presence, breathing evenly and continuing. One ordinary, peaceful, utterly unremarkable day at a time.
Hey guys, still here, still slow, still calm. By this point, something subtle had embedded itself in the rhythm of life. Ordinary people had discovered the invisible patterns of survival. Not heroic patterns, not legendary ones, just practical, repetitive, quiet patterns that sustained life day after day. Every movement, no matter how small, carried purpose. Waking, eating, working, sleeping. Nothing dramatic, everything essential. Mornings were softer now. No one rushed. People woke with the first light, adjusted their rooms, prepared food, and moved deliberately through the house. The sound of daily life became comforting. Footsteps in the hall, creaks in the floor, water boiling on the stove. These sounds were the markers of survival. Not alarms, not warnings, markers. Work had fully blended with daily existence. Tasks were performed not to impress, not to achieve, but to maintain. Repairing, tending, observing. Life became a chain of small, deliberate acts. Children grew up immersed in this pattern. They learned without instruction. Observation became the teacher. Attention became the skill. Patience became a way of life. Education was practical. Lessons focused on sustaining life, how to notice patterns, how to respond calmly, how to conserve energy. Public life existed in this same quiet order. Markets operated like clockwork, without clocks. Neighbors greeted each other with nods and brief conversation. Community existed through routine, through reliability, through knowing who was present and who was absent. Religion had adapted too. It was no longer about fervor or salvation. It was about rhythm, about markers in time, about familiarity. Medical care remained steady. Illness was noted, symptoms monitored, treatment applied calmly. No panic, no drama. Bodies were managed like machines that needed maintenance, not moral tests. Touch had become deliberate, intentional, a comforting presence when needed, but never casual. Its rarity had made it meaningful. Emotions had flattened into sustainable levels. People felt without being overwhelmed. Joy passed gently. Grief was slow and quiet. Anger dissipated before it could escalate. Contentment, even in small doses, became its own reward. Nighttime routines had solidified into a sacred rhythm. People prepared for sleep with care. Darkness was no longer intimidating. It was predictable, welcoming almost. Dreams mirrored waking life. They were repetitive, calm, ordinary. Even the subconscious had adopted the rhythm of survival. Memory was selective. Details of fear and chaos had faded. What remained were the lessons learned. How to continue, how to act deliberately, how to manage life without needing spectacle or crisis. News from the outside world still arrived. People listened, absorbed what mattered, and let the rest pass. Empathy was focused, efficient, sustainable. Time itself had taken on a new quality. It wasn't measured by events or milestones. It was measured by patterns, by sequences of doing, by cycles of survival. Years passed gently. Life continued. Children became adults. Adults aged. And no one noticed the drama of passing years, only the rhythm. By now, ordinary people no longer asked, "When will this end?"
They didn't need closure. They had learned to live without it. The plague, when no one was dying, had taught them an invisible rhythm, a quiet mastery of life's essentials. And in that rhythm, ordinary people found something that felt rare: resilience. Not celebrated, not recognized, but present, steady, enduring. Tomorrow would come, and they would meet it, not with noise, not with urgency, but with calm, deliberate attention, and quiet competence. They had learned the invisible art of survival, the art that requires nothing but presence, and presence, over time, became everything. One ordinary, quietly resilient day at a time.
Hey guys, still here, still breathing evenly. By this point, ordinary life had entered a phase that was almost luxurious in its own quiet way. Not because there was abundance, not because there was freedom, but because people had learned the subtle art of comfort, the slow, careful expansion of what could feel safe. Homes became sanctuaries, not lavishly furnished, not meticulously decorated, just arranged so that daily life moved with minimal friction. People learned how to make spaces function efficiently, where to store tools, where to keep food, where to rest without being disturbed. Every small adjustment made daily life smoother. Mornings remained unhurried. The sun rising marked the beginning, but people no longer depended on its exact position. They depended on habit. Routine had replaced urgency. Tasks flowed naturally. Chores, work, observation, they blended seamlessly. People discovered that if life was slow enough, mistakes didn't overwhelm. You could correct things without panic. You could plan in increments. You could anticipate minor problems before they became disasters. Children learned the rhythm effortlessly. They mimicked adults, absorbed the pace, internalized the sense of balance. Patience became instinctive. Observation became skill. Education continued quietly. Not formal lessons, life itself taught. How to notice changes in weather, how to sense moods without words, how to repair, how to anticipate, how to persist. Public life had settled into its own careful routine. Markets were orderly. People greeted neighbors with minimal fuss. Commerce was functional, not performative. Social ties existed, but only where necessary. Community cohesion was subtle. Religion became a rhythm rather than a force. Services marked time gently. Rituals were familiar. Faith was a stabilizing background hum. Medical care was steady. Illnesses were managed without drama. People observed symptoms, applied remedies calmly. Preventive care became instinctual. Touch became measured and meaningful. People valued physical presence more than words. Affection was intentional. Comfort was given and received quietly. Emotions continued their gentle flattening. Anger dissipated quickly. Sadness arrived slowly and left quietly. Joy was brief. Contentment lingered. Nighttime was predictable. People rested fully. Darkness no longer invoked fear. It was familiar, comfortable. Sleep arrived naturally. Dreams mirrored waking life. Ordinary routines, quiet landscapes, repetition, security. Memory focused on practical lessons. Past fear faded. Lessons endured. Skills were remembered. News from outside remained background noise. People listened, assessed, returned to their routines. Empathy was selective but genuine. Time had taken on a steady, almost tactile quality. Days were measured not in hours but in patterns of activity. Life was continuous, predictable, safe. People had stopped asking, "When will this end?"
They no longer needed closure. Life itself had become sufficient. The plague, when no one was dying, had taught ordinary people something remarkable. Not heroism, not triumph, but subtle, sustainable mastery. And in this mastery, people had expanded their comfort zone slowly, without spectacle, without drama, without urgency. Tomorrow would arrive, and people would meet it calmly, efficiently, presently. They had learned the quiet, patient expansion of comfort, and it became everything they needed. One ordinary, deliberate, fully inhabitable day at a time.
By now, something extraordinary had taken root in the humblest of ways. Ordinary people had discovered what might be called a triumph. But it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't recognized. It was the triumph of habit. They had turned repetition into stability, routine into resilience. The small acts of daily life became shields against uncertainty. Mornings followed gentle rhythms. No one woke in panic. People rose, moved, and prepared their homes with deliberate care. Tasks flowed seamlessly from one to the next. Breakfast, chores, work, observation, rest. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was hurried. Work became a meditation, not because it was enjoyable, but because it was predictable. Tasks completed correctly mattered more than how many were done. Repairing an old shoe, tending a garden, maintaining tools, each small act became an anchor. Children absorbed these patterns naturally. Observation replaced formal instruction. They learned patience, attention, deliberation. They internalized stability without needing it spelled out. Education was practical, lessons in care, in noticing, in endurance. Curiosity survived, but became measured. Energy was conserved. Focus was sharpened. Public spaces mirrored this slow mastery. Markets operated efficiently. Social interaction was economical. Greetings were concise. Commerce functioned on recognition and reliability. Community existed quietly, without ceremony or drama. Religion had become background architecture, markers in time, familiar rituals, no demands, just structure. Medical care remained steady. Illnesses were noted, treatment applied calmly. Preventive measures were routine. Touch was deliberate and meaningful. Affection existed intentionally. Comfort was a conscious practice. Emotions stabilized. Anger passed quickly. Sadness was gradual and processed. Joy arrived briefly and left quietly. Contentment lingered without fanfare. Grief remained, integrated into the flow of life rather than interrupting it. Nighttime routines were fully internalized. People rested without fear. Darkness was familiar. Sleep came naturally. Dreams mirrored waking life. They were calm, repetitive, familiar. The subconscious rehearsed continuity. Memory continued to filter experiences. Past fear faded. Lessons endured. Skills remained sharp. News from the outside world arrived occasionally. People listened, assessed relevance, returned to their routines. Empathy was selective, but present. Time itself had become a gentle companion, measured in patterns, not clocks. Life was continuous, steady, manageable. People had stopped asking for endings. They no longer waited for closure. Life itself was sufficient. The plague, when no one was dying, had transformed ordinary existence into a quiet, sustainable victory. It was the triumph of habit, the ordinary triumph of consistency, the deliberate cultivation of calm, attention, and presence. Tomorrow would arrive. People would meet it steadily, without panic, without ambition, without expectation.
And in the repetition, in the daily care, in the quiet constancy, they had won something rare. Not recognition, not glory, but mastery. The mastery of ordinary life. One deliberate, quiet, completely inhabitable day at a time.
By this point, something subtle had changed in how people understood the world. Life itself had become the measure. Not accomplishments, not progress, not survival in dramatic terms. Just life. Existing. Continuing. Flowing steadily. Mornings began without expectation. Light entered the room. People rose, moved through familiar routines, prepared meals, tended to work, observed, rested. Every small act became a mark of existence. No urgency needed, no spectacle required. Work was performed deliberately. Every repaired object, every cultivated field, every tended animal was a proof of life. Not progress, not achievement, just proof that the world was still being attended to. Children grew up immersed in this rhythm. They absorbed the patterns without effort. Patience, observation, endurance, they were instincts now. Education continued through practice. Lessons were absorbed by participation. No lectures, no exams, just the quiet demonstration of life being maintained. Public life remained minimal. Markets functioned on recognition and habit. Greetings were simple and meaningful. Community existed quietly through shared presence. Religion marked time gently. Rituals were repeated. Faith was a background rhythm. Medical care continued calmly. Illness was observed. Treatment applied deliberately. Bodies were cared for without panic or drama. Touch, once scarce, had returned meaningfully. Physical presence became deliberate comfort. Gestures were intentional. Affection was managed thoughtfully. Emotions remained stable. Anger passed quickly. Sadness arrived slowly. Joy appeared briefly. Contentment lingered. Grief persisted, quietly integrated into daily life. Nighttime was peaceful. Darkness was familiar. Sleep arrived naturally. Dreams mirrored waking life. Routine, repetition, continuity. Memory continued to preserve lessons. Past fear faded. Skills endured. Patterns became second nature. News from the outside world arrived occasionally. People listened, assessed relevance, returned to their own rhythms. Empathy remained measured. Time had become steady, measured in acts of daily life, measured in the simple flow from one moment to the next. People no longer waited for an end. They no longer demanded closure. Life itself was sufficient. The plague, when no one was dying, had transformed ordinary life into a quiet, self-sustaining rhythm. The rhythm itself became the proof of survival, the measure of existence. Tomorrow would arrive, and people would meet it, not triumphantly, not dramatically, but deliberately. They had learned that life didn't need endpoints. Life didn't need heroics. Life didn't even need recognition. It only needed to continue. One ordinary, deliberate, inhabitable day at a time.
Not dramatic, not heroic, not even particularly interesting in the traditional sense, but it worked. Every day followed the gentle pattern that had become familiar over years. Mornings, waking, tending, preparing. Days, work, observation, care. Evenings, rest, reflection, quiet interaction. No panic, no excitement, no expectation. Life existed in measured acts. Work was deliberate. Tasks were done for their own sake. Repairing a roof,
tending a garden, fixing tools. Each action was proof of continued existence, proof that life endured. Children learned by immersion, by watching, by repeating patterns. They internalized calm, patience, and deliberate attention. Education had become practical. Life itself was the teacher. Lessons were absorbed through doing, observing, adjusting. Curiosity survived, measured, and purposeful. Public life was subdued but functional. Markets moved predictably. Neighbors greeted each other with acknowledgement. Community cohesion existed quietly through shared routine. Religion had fully integrated into background rhythm. Familiar rituals marked time. Faith wasn't demanded, it simply existed, providing structure. Not dramatic, not heroic, not even particularly interesting in the traditional sense, but it worked. Every day followed the gentle pattern that had become familiar over years. Mornings, waking, tending, preparing. Days, work, observation, care. Evenings, rest, reflection, quiet interaction. No panic, no excitement, no expectation. Life existed in measured acts. Work was deliberate. Tasks were done for their own sake. Repairing a roof, tending a garden, fixing tools. Each action was proof of continued existence, proof that life endured. Children learned by immersion, by watching, by repeating patterns. They internalized calm, patience, and deliberate attention. Education had become practical. Life itself was the teacher. Lessons were absorbed through doing, observing, adjusting. Curiosity survived, measured, and purposeful. Public life was subdued but functional. Markets moved predictably. Neighbors greeted each other with acknowledgement. Community cohesion existed quietly through shared routine. Religion had fully integrated into background rhythm. Familiar rituals marked time. Faith wasn't demanded, it simply existed, providing structure. Medical care was consistent and calm. Bodies were maintained steadily without panic. Touch was intentional and meaningful. Gestures of affection were deliberate. Comfort was given with awareness. Emotions had stabilized. Anger dissipated quickly. Sadness was slow and quiet. Joy appeared briefly, appreciated without exaggeration. Grief was integrated into daily life. Nighttime routines were sacred. Darkness was familiar and reassuring. Sleep came naturally. Dreams mirrored waking life, routine, calm, repetitive, reassuring. Memory retained practical lessons. Fear faded. Patterns endured. People remembered how to continue. News from the outside world arrived occasionally. It was noted, assessed. Then life returned to its rhythm. Empathy remained, focused on what was immediately relevant. Time had taken on a steady, almost tactile quality, measured not in hours or years, but in cycles of action and care. People no longer waited for endings. Closure was unnecessary. Life itself was sufficient. The plague, when no one was dying, had transformed existence into something that was quiet, sustainable, and entirely inhabitable. Routine had become everything, not dullness, not limitation, but mastery. The mastery of continuing, of living deliberately, of surviving quietly. And in this final quiet, ordinary people had found something rare: stability, resilience, presence. Tomorrow would arrive, and they would meet it calmly, steadily, intentionally, not triumphantly, not dramatically, but fully,
because they had learned the ultimate lesson. Life does not need spectacle to endure. Life only needs attention, care, and quiet consistency. One ordinary, deliberate, inhabitable day at a time.
By now, something quietly remarkable had taken root. Ordinary life, what had once seemed small, repetitive, and mundane, had revealed its subtle power. Ordinary people had discovered something extraordinary: continuity without crisis. They didn't need drama. They didn't need excitement. They didn't need recognition. Presence had become enough. Sustained attention had become enough. Deliberate action had become enough. Mornings followed their gentle routines. Light woke rooms, but no one relied on urgency. People rose, moved, and attended to tasks with calm intent. Breakfast was prepared carefully. Work unfolded naturally. Chores, repair, observation, they blended into seamless patterns. Tasks were no longer measured by achievement. They were valued for completion, for maintaining stability, for preserving continuity. Children grew up immersed in this rhythm. They learned patience and attentiveness naturally. Observation became their teacher. Repetition became their skill. They internalized the slow, deliberate pace of life. Education remained practical. Learning happened through participation, not instruction. How to repair, how to anticipate, how to sustain. Curiosity was applied intentionally. Public life had a gentle, measured order. Markets functioned reliably. Greetings were brief but meaningful. Community existed without spectacle, sustained through shared routine. Religion became a gentle background hum. Rituals marked time without demanding attention. Faith was subtle, stabilizing, predictable. Medical care continued calmly. Illnesses were noted. Treatment was applied deliberately. Bodies were maintained steadily, without drama. Touch remained intentional and meaningful. Gestures of comfort were valued. Affection was deliberate and measured. Emotions were stable. Anger dissipated quickly. Sadness passed slowly. Joy arrived briefly and softly. Grief was integrated quietly into daily life. Nighttime became a trusted companion. Darkness was familiar. Sleep arrived naturally. Dreams reflected routine, repetition, and calm continuity. Memory focused on lessons learned. Fear faded. Patterns endured. People remembered how to continue. News from the outside world was filtered gently. People listened, absorbed what mattered, returned to their own lives. Empathy remained selective, effective, and sustainable. Time had become tactile, measured in the sequence of acts. Life flowed predictably. Continuity itself was a kind of security. People no longer asked when it would end. Closure was irrelevant. Life itself was sufficient. The plague, when no one was dying, had turned ordinary existence into a quietly extraordinary practice. Mastery was found in the mundane, in attention, in presence, in doing what needed to be done without drama. Tomorrow would arrive, and people would meet it, not triumphantly, not dramatically, but deliberately, because they had discovered the rare, almost invisible truth: ordinary life, sustained carefully, was extraordinary enough. One quiet, deliberate, inhabitable day at a time. By this point, ordinary people had learned the subtle, almost invisible skill of patience. Not the impatient waiting for an end, not the desperate hope for change, but a patient attention to the continuity of life itself. Mornings unfolded predictably. People rose with the light. They moved through daily rituals deliberately. Meals were prepared. Work was completed carefully. Observations made. Rest was taken when needed.
Every act became a testament to endurance. Repairing, tending, cleaning, observing, none of it glamorous, but all of it mattered, and it all contributed to sustaining life. Children absorbed this rhythm naturally. They learned patience through repetition. Observation became the primary mode of learning. Deliberation became instinctive. Small acts, repeated day after day, became the foundation of survival. Education was practical. Lessons were absorbed through doing, through watching, through careful attention. Curiosity remained, but it was measured, applied thoughtfully, deliberately. Public life remained minimal and efficient. Markets ran predictably. Greetings were simple but meaningful. Community cohesion existed quietly, maintained through shared routine rather than spectacle. Religion had settled into background rhythm. Rituals marked time. Faith no longer demanded attention, it offered stability. Medical care continued steadily. Illness was noted. Treatment applied thoughtfully. Bodies were maintained without panic. Touch was intentional. Comfort was deliberate. Affection was meaningful, given with awareness. Emotions stabilized. Anger dissipated quickly. Sadness unfolded gradually. Joy appeared briefly and quietly. Contentment lingered. Grief remained, integrated into daily life. Nighttime routines were fully internalized. Darkness was familiar. Sleep arrived naturally. Dreams mirrored waking life, calm, repetitive, reassuring. Memory retained practical lessons. Fear faded. Skills endured. Patterns became automatic. News from outside arrived occasionally. People listened, assessed relevance, and returned to their routines. Empathy remained focused, sustainable, and effective. Time had become steady, measured in patterns of action and care. Not hours, not deadlines, just life flowing, continuous, reliable. People no longer waited for endings. They no longer demanded closure. Life itself was sufficient. The plague, when no one was dying, had taught ordinary people the subtle art of patience. The patience to observe, to act deliberately, to continue quietly, day after day. Tomorrow would arrive, and people would meet it, not with drama, not with ambition, but with calm, deliberate attention, because they had discovered the rare, quiet mastery of continuation. One patient, ordinary, inhabitable day at a time.
By now, ordinary life had become its own achievement. Not heroic, not dramatic, just effective. People had learned something subtle, the invisible work of staying present. It wasn't celebrated. It didn't need to be. It simply existed in each small act of daily life. Mornings were gentle. People woke with the sun, moved through familiar routines, prepared meals, attended to tasks, observed, rested. Work was deliberate, not done for recognition, not done for status, but done carefully, attentively, repairing tools, tending animals, fixing what was broken. Children absorbed this rhythm naturally. They learned patience, attention, deliberation. Observation became their teacher. Education remained practical. Lessons came from participation, from noticing, from repetition. Curiosity was applied thoughtfully. Energy was preserved for what mattered. Public life remained quiet and functional. Markets moved predictably. Greetings were minimal but meaningful. Community cohesion existed through shared habits rather than announcements. Religion became background stability. Rituals marked time gently. Faith wasn't demanded, it was felt as structure. Medical care continued steadily. Illness was observed, treatment applied deliberately. Bodies were cared for without panic. Touch remained intentional and valuable. Affection was measured,
comfort was deliberate. Emotions had flattened into sustainability. Anger passed quickly, sadness arrived slowly, joy appeared briefly, contentment lingered, grief existed, integrated quietly into life. Nighttime was fully settled, darkness was familiar, sleep came naturally, dreams mirrored routine and calm continuity. Memory retained lessons, past fear faded, patterns endured, skills became instinctive. News from outside arrived occasionally, people listened, assessed relevance, returned to their routines. Empathy remained focused and practical. Time had taken on a tactile rhythm, measured in acts of attention and care, not in hours or calendars. Life flowed steadily, predictably, continuously. People no longer asked, "When will this end?" Closure was unnecessary. Life itself was sufficient. The plague, when no one was dying, had revealed that ordinary life, lived attentively, was itself extraordinary. The invisible work of staying present was the quiet mastery people had achieved. Tomorrow would arrive, and people would meet it, not heroically, not dramatically, but with steady, deliberate attention. Because ordinary life, attended to fully, was enough. One quiet, deliberate, inhabitable day at a time.